Hi, fourth graders. Welcome back for another read aloud of Number the Stars. Today we are going to read chapter 12 and some of chapter 13. Last time we read, we found out that Uncle Henrik was going to take some of the Jewish families who were at the funeral in his boat and across to Sweden to help them escape from the Nazi soldiers. And so we're going to read about that part of their journey today. Let me pull up our book here. All right, so chapter 12 is called Where Was Mama? So if you remember last time they had the first group of people had left the house to go to the boat, and so that's where we're picking up. Mr. Rosen tripped on the loose step outside the kitchen door. His wife grasped his arm and he regained his balance. "It's very dark," Mama whispered as they stood in the yard with their blankets and bundles of food gathered in their arms. "And we can't use any kind of light. I'll go first. I know the way very well. And you follow me. Try not to stumble over the tree roots in the path. Feel carefully with your feet. The path is uneven. And be very, very quiet," she added, unnecessarily. The night was quiet too. A slight breeze moved in the tops of the trees, and from across the meadow came the sound of the sea's movement, which was a constant sound here and had always been. But no birds called or cried here now. In the night, the cow slept silently in the barn, the kitten upstairs in Kirsty's arms. There were stars here and there, dotting the sky among thin clouds, but no moon. Anne-Marie shivered, standing at the foot of the steps. "Come," Mama murmured. She moved away from the house. One by one, the Rosens turned and hugged Anne-Marie silently. Ellen came to her last. The two girls held each other. "I'll come back someday," Ellen whispered fiercely. "I promise." "I know you will," Anne-Marie whispered back, holding her friend tightly. Then they were gone, Mama and the Rosens. Anne-Marie was alone. She went into the house, crying suddenly, and closed the door against the night. The lid of the casket was closed again. Now the room was empty. There was no sign of the people who had sat there for those hours. Anne-Marie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She opened the dark curtains and the windows. She curled once more in the rocker, trying to relax. She traced their route in her mind. She knew the old path, too. Not as well as her mother, who had followed it almost every day of her childhood with her dog scampering behind, but Anne-Marie had often walked to town and back that way. And she remembered the turns, the twisted trees whose gnarled roots pushed the earth now and then into knotted clumps, and the thick bushes that often flowered in early summer. She walked with them in her mind, feeling the way through the darkness. It would take them, she thought, half an hour to reach the place where Uncle Henrik was waiting with his boat. Mama would leave them there, pause a minute, no more, for a final hug, and then she would turn and come home. It would be faster for Mama alone, with no need to wait as the Rosens, unfamiliar with the path, slowly felt their way along. Mama would hurry, now sure-footed now, back to her children. The clock in the hall struck once. It was 2:30 in the morning. Her mother would be home in an hour, Anne-Marie decided. She rocked gently back and forth in the old chair. Mama would be home by 3:30. She thought of Papa back in Copenhagen alone. He would be awake too. He would be wishing he could have come, but knowing too that he must come and go, as always, to the corner store for the newspaper, to his office when morning came. Now he would be afraid for them, and watching the clock, waiting for word that the Rosens were safe, that Mama and the girls were here at the farm, starting a new day with the sun shining through the kitchen window, and cream on their oatmeal. It was hard for the ones who were waiting, Anne-Marie knew. Less danger, perhaps, but more fear. She yawned and her head nodded. She fell asleep, and it was a sleep as thin as the night clouds, dotted with dreams that came and went like the stars. Light woke her, but it was not really morning, not yet. It was only the first hint of a slightly lightening sky. The pale gleam at the edge of the meadow, a sign that far away somewhere, to the east, where Sweden still slept, morning would be coming soon. Dawn would creep across the Swedish farmland and coast, and then it would wash little Denmark with light and move across the North Sea to wake Norway. Anne-Marie blinked in confusion, sitting up, remembering after a moment where she was and why. But it was not right. The pale light at the horizon, it should still be dark. It should be dark still. It should still be night. She stood stiffly, stretching her legs, and went to the hall to look at the old clock. It was past 4 o'clock. Where was Mama? Perhaps she had come home, not wanting to wake Anne-Marie, and had gone to bed herself. Surely that was it. Mama must have been exhausted. She had been up all night and made the dangerous journey to the boat, and returned through the dark woods, wanting only to sleep. Quickly, Anne-Marie went up the narrow staircase. The door to the bedroom where she had slept with Ellen was open. The 2 small beds were neatly made, covered with old quilts, and empty. Beside it, Uncle Henrik's door was open too, and his bed too was unused and empty. Despite her worry, Anne-Marie smiled slightly when she saw some of Uncle Henrik's clothes crumpled in a chair and a pair of shoes caked with the barnyard dirt lying on the floor. "He needs a wife," she said to herself, imitating Mama. The door to the other bedroom, the one Kirsty and Mama were sharing, was closed. Quietly, not wanting to wake them, Anne-Marie pushed it open. The kitten's ears moved, standing up straight, and its eyes popped open wide, and it raised its head and yawned. It pried itself out of Kirsty's arms, stretched, and then jumped lightly to the floor and came to Anne-Marie. It rubbed itself against her leg and purred. Kirsty sighed and turned in her sleep, one arm free now of the kitten's warmth and comfort, drug itself across the pillow. There was no one else in the wide bed. Anne-Marie moved quickly to the window which overlooked the clearing that led to the path's entrance. The light outside was still very dim, and she peered through the dimness, trying to see, looking for the opening in the trees where the path began, looking for Mama hurrying home. After a second, she saw a shape there. Something unfamiliar, something that had not been there the day before. A dark shape, no more than a blurred heap at the beginning of the path. Anne-Marie squinted, forcing her eyes to understand, needing to understand, not wanting to understand. The shape moved, and she knew it was her mother, lying on the earth. Okay, chapter 13 is called Run as Fast as You Can. Still moving quietly, so as not to wake her sister, Anne-Marie sped down the stairs and through the kitchen door. Her foot caught the loose step, and she faltered for a moment, righting herself, then dashed across the ground to the place where her mother lay. "Mama," she called desperately. "Mama." "Shh," Mama said, raising her head. "I'm all right." "But Mama," Anne-Marie asked, kneeling beside her, "what's wrong? What happened?" Her mother pulled herself into a sitting position. She winced in pain. "I'm all right, really. Don't worry. All the Rosens are with Henrik. That's the important thing." She smiled a little, though her face was drawn with pain as she bit her lip, the smile fading. "We got there quite quickly, even though it was still so dark, and it was difficult for the Rosens, not knowing the path. Henrik was there waiting on the boat, and he took them aboard and down below so quickly to the cabin that they were invisible in an instant. He said the others were already there. Peter got them there safely, too. So I turned and I hurried home. I was so anxious to get back to you girls, I should have been more careful." Talking softly, she brushed some grass and dirt from her hands. "Can you believe it? I was very nearly here, well, maybe just halfway, when I tripped over a root and went sprawling." Mama sighed. "I'm so clumsy," she said, as if she were scolding herself. "I'm afraid my ankle is broken, Anne-Marie. Thank goodness it is nothing worse. An ankle mends, and I am home, and the Rosens are with Henrik." "You should have seen me, Anne-Marie," she said, shaking her head with a wry look. "Your proper mama, crawling inch by inch. I probably looked like a drunkard." She reached for Anne-Marie's arm. "Here, let me lean on you. I think if you support me on this side, I can make my way up to the house. Goodness, what a clumsy fool I am. Here, let me put my arm over your shoulders. You're such a good, strong, brave girl. Now, very slowly. There." Mama's face was white with pain. Anne-Marie could see it even through the faint light of the approaching dawn. She hobbled, leaning heavily on her daughter, pausing again and again towards the house. "When we get inside, I'll have a cup of tea, and then we'll call the doctor, and I'll tell him that I fell on the stairs. You'll have to help me wash away the grass and twigs. Here, Anne-Marie, let me rest for a moment." They had reached the house, and Mama sank down to the steps and sat. She took several deep breaths. Anne-Marie sat beside her and held her hand. "Mama, I was so worried when you didn't come back." Mama nodded. "I knew you would be. I thought of you, worrying as I dragged myself along. But here I am, safe with you now. Everything is fine. What time is it?" "It must be 4:30, or close to it." "They will sail soon." Mama turned her head and gazed across the meadow to the sea and the vast sky above it. There were no stars now, only the gray, pale sky, with pinkness at its border. Soon they will be safe, too. Anne-Marie relaxed, stroked her mother's hand, and looked down at the discolored, swollen ankle. "Mama, what's this?" she asked suddenly, reaching into the grass at the foot of the steps. Mama looked. She gasped. "Oh, my God," she said. Anne-Marie picked it up. She recognized it now, knew what it was. It was the packet that Peter had given to Mr. Rosen. Mr. Rosen tripped on the step, remember? It must have fallen from his pocket. We'll have to save it and give it back to Peter. Anne-Marie handed it to her mother. Do you know what it is? Her mother didn't answer. Her face was stricken. She looked at the path and down at her ankle. It's important, isn't it, Mama? It was for Uncle Henrik. I remember Peter saying it was very important. I heard him tell Mr. Rosen. Her mother tried to stand, but fell back against the steps with a groan. My God, she murmured again. It may all have been for nothing. Emery took the packet from her mother's hand and stood. I will take it, she said. I know the way, and it's almost light now. I can run like the wind. Mama spoke quickly, her voice tense. Anne-Marie, go into the house and get the small basket on the table. Quickly, quickly, put an apple into it and some cheese. Put this packet underneath. Do you understand? Hurry. Anne-Marie did instantly as she was told. The basket, the packet at the bottom. She covered it with a napkin, then some wrapped cheese, an apple. She glanced around the kitchen, saw some bread, and added that. The little basket was full. She took it to where her mother was. You must run to the boat, and if anyone should stop you. Who would stop me? Anne-Marie, you understand how dangerous this is. If any soldiers see you, if they stop you, you must pretend to be nothing more than a little girl, a silly, empty-headed little girl, taking lunch to a fisherman, a foolish uncle who forgot his bread and cheese. Mama, what is in the bottom? But her mother still didn't answer the question. Go, she said firmly. Go right now and run as fast as you can. Anne-Marie kissed her mother quickly, grabbed the basket from her mother's lap, turned, and ran toward the path. All right, so that was chapter 12 and 13, and we have chapter 14 left. I think we'll read a little bit of this one before we stop here. So chapter 14 is called On the Dark Path. Only now, entering the woods on the footpath, did Anne-Marie realize how cold the dawn was. She had watched and helped earlier as the others donned sweaters, jackets, and coats, and she had peered into the night, following them with her eyes as they moved silently off, bulky in their garments, blankets in their arms. But she wore only a light sweater over her cotton dress, though the October day later would be warmed by sunlight. Now it was gray, chilly, and damp. She shivered. The path curved, and she could no longer look behind her and see the clearing with the farmhouse outlined against the pale sky and the lightning meadow beyond. Now there were only the dark woods ahead. Underfoot, the path, laced with thick roots hidden under the fallen leaves, was invisible. She felt her way with her feet, trying not to stumble. The handle of the straw basket scratched her arm through her sweater. She shifted it and tried to run. She thought of a story she had often told Kirsty as they cuddle in bed at night. Once upon a time, there was a little girl, she told herself silently, who had a beautiful red cloak. Her mother had made it for her. She wore it so often that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. Kirsty would always interrupt there. Why was it called a Red Riding Hood? Kirsty would ask. Why didn't they just call her Little Red Cloak? Well, it had a hood that covered her head. She had beautiful curls, like you, Kirsty. Maybe someday Mama will make you a coat with a hood to cover your curls and keep you warm. But why, Kirsty would ask, was it a riding hood? Was she riding a horse? Maybe she had a horse that she rode sometimes, but not in this story. Now stop interrupting every minute. Anne-Marie smiled, feeling her way through the dark, remembering how Kirsty always interrupted stories to ask questions. Often she just wanted to make the story last longer. The story continued. One day, the little girl's mother said, I want you to take a basket of food to your grandmother. She is sick in bed. Come, let me tie your red cloak. The grandmother lived deep in the woods, didn't she? Kirsty asked. In the dangerous woods where wolves lived. Anne-Marie heard a small noise, a squirrel perhaps, or a rabbit scampering nearby. She paused, stood still in the path, and smiled again. Kirsty would have been frightened. She would have grabbed Anne-Marie's hand and said, A wolf! But Anne-Marie knew that these woods were not like the woods in the story. There were no wolves or bears or tigers, none of the beasts that populated Kirsty's vivid imagination. She hurried on. Still, they were very dark, these woods. Anne-Marie had never followed this path in the dark before. She had told her mother she would run, and she tried. All right, and that's where we're going to stop. So Anne-Marie's on the path and trying to get whatever's in that package to the boat and Uncle Henrik. So even though you're finishing your book club book today, next week on Tuesday and Thursday, you'll still be listening to your Number the Stars read aloud so that we can finish the book and you can find out what happens to Kirsty and Anne-Marie and their families. So we will stop here and go watch the lesson now for your final day of your book club book. Bye, fourth graders.